So my wife, let's call her Grace, she's 26. She cheated on me with my brother Mark, who's also 26. That's why I, Alex, 34, ended up getting divorced recently. And yeah, my family, they absolutely took his side over mine. It felt like a punch to the gut. But honestly, looking back, maybe it was just karma, but not in the way you'd expect. It was karma finally catching up to them. To help you get it, to really see how my whole life felt like it was leading up to this gut-wrenching betrayal, let me start at the very beginning. Mark was born when I was 8, and from the moment he arrived, he was, without question, the golden child. Growing up in this quiet little suburban town outside of Boston, I swear in the eyes of my parents, David and Carol, I just faded away. It wasn't like they were outright mean, not at all, but I was definitely treated like an afterthought, and this reality was hammered home to us, to both of us, our whole childhood. I can still picture it perfectly. I was in 6th grade, and I won first place in the science fair. I'd spent months working on this thing. It was a fully functional model showing the dynamics of the solar system with all the orbital calculations and the planets actually moving. The judges gave me first prize and a special commendation for the math part. You'd think my parents would be there, right? Be proud? Nope. They didn't come to the ceremony at all. Why? Because Mark had t-ball practice. Not even a game, just practice. Their walls back home were covered in Mark's participation ribbons, little colorful strips of fabric for just showing up. My actual legitimate award sat on the mantelpiece, unopened, for a week before it just vanished into the basement. Probably tucked away next to the dusty Christmas decorations. That set the tone for our entire childhood. Mark's average grades, celebrated. My straight A's, met with distracted nods. My mother, Carol, actually voiced concern that my being in advanced placement classes might make Mark feel bad about his regular ones. Can you believe that? For his 16th birthday, Mark got a brand new car. Dad said it was to build his confidence. Meanwhile, I had to get a part-time job at 16 just to save up for college and buy my own clothes. High school graduation was rough. Instead of watching me get my diploma and give the valedictorian speech, yeah, I was valedictorian, not that it seemed to matter much. My parents spent most of the ceremony taking pictures of Mark, who was 10, playing in the stands. He was whining about being bored, so they missed me announce my scholarship to a university in Chicago. A celebratory dinner they'd planned for Mark's early baseball season kickoff was suddenly turned into a party for him because he seemed a little down about all your achievements, according to Mum. She even suggested I tone down how I talked about my college plans. I barely even registered getting accepted into that university in Chicago on a partial scholarship because Mark had just made the junior baseball team. That's nice, honey, Mom said. But did you hear Mark might make a starting pitcher next season? I remember that moment so clearly. It was then I realized nothing I ever did, nothing I ever achieved would ever be enough. I was the practice child, the test run. They put all their real parenting effort into Mark. So with my scholarship money, every penny I'd saved from working 3 part-time jobs since I was 16, and this fierce determination to just never look back, I headed off to Chicago. When I was 18, the day I moved into my dorm, Mark had a summer league game. My parents left early to make sure they didn't miss it. They didn't even help me unpack. Those college years were completely life-changing. For the first time, I felt like I was being judged purely on my own merits. I discovered I had a knack for software architecture, dove deep into computer science, and graduated with honors. My undergraduate thesis on optimizing distributed systems got the attention of several big tech companies. By the time I graduated, I had 5 job offers lined up. A tiny part of me still hoped maybe things could change, so I picked a promising company in Chicago, partly because it wasn't too far from home. Within 2 years, I was leading my own development team, and by my 5th year, I was the youngest, senior developer in the company's history. My parents, they were too busy helping Mark navigate his 3rd college major change to really even understand what I did for a living. The real turning point in my life happened 4 years ago at a little coffee shop near my office. That's where I met Grace. She was working as a barista while finishing her teaching degree. She had this incredible ability to remember every regular's order and something personal about them. She admitted later she'd been writing little encouraging notes on my coffee cups for weeks before she finally agreed to go out with me. I hadn't even noticed. I was so buried in work. Our first date lasted 6 hours. We talked about everything, our families, our fears, our dreams. When I told her about growing up, about the whole Mark situation, she actually seemed to get it. "They're blind," she said. "They have no idea what they were missing." It felt like the first time I was truly being seen. The next year felt almost unreal. We cooked elaborate meals together, spent weekends exploring hidden bookstores in the city, hiked out in the countryside. She pushed me to go for a big promotion at work, helped me prepare for the interviews, and celebrated my success like no one else ever had. When I asked her to marry me after 14 months, she cried happy tears and said she'd been hoping I would. Our wedding was small and perfect, at least I thought so at the time. When my family arrived, they spent the entire reception talking about Mark's new job opportunity in California. Mom actually interrupted Grace's father's toast to show everyone a text message from Mark about his 2nd interview. Seriously, in hindsight, I should have seen it as a massive red flag, but Grace just laughed it off, saying she thought their dedication to Mark was sweet. For 3 years, our marriage was everything I could have wanted. We started talking about starting a family, bought a lovely condo in a nice neighborhood, and took trips whenever we could. Grace made our place feel like the warm, caring home I never had as a kid, decorating it with photos from our travels and planting a little container garden on our balcony. We were a team. She always said that. "Us against the world," she'd remark. Then Mark got in touch. This was last year. He'd apparently flamed out in California, said the startup culture wasn't his vibe, and was back in town. He sent me this long email, talking about missing his older brother and wanting to mend our relationship now that he was grown up. "Family should stick together," he wrote. After thinking about it for a week, Grace encouraged me to give him a chance. "People change," she said. "Maybe they've realized what they missed." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet Mark for dinner. It was awkward, sure, but the first meeting seemed promising. Mark seemed different, more mature, more self-aware. He talked about wanting to make amends and even admitted he'd had it too easy growing up. A week later, I introduced him to Grace and they clicked right away too. Or so I thought. As I would tragically learn later, it wasn't clicking, it was something else entirely. Everything seemed perfect at first. Mark would stop by for dinner, a couple of times a week. He seemed genuinely interested in my work, brought wine and entertained us with stories from his California adventures. He even seemed to stick up for me when our parents started their usual favoritism routine at Sunday dinners. For a while I actually started to believe we might finally be real brothers, but slowly, subtly, things started to change. Mark began showing up at our place unexpectedly, sometimes while I was still at work. Grace said they were just hanging out, and it was nice to have company while she graded papers. He'd stay for dinner, use my coffee mug and share inside jokes with my wife. I chose to ignore the little things. Their sudden silence when I walked into the room, Grace's phone abruptly turning face down when I sat next to her, their knowing, glances over dinner, their coincidental meetings at the coffee shop or the grocery store. I was blind, willfully blind, I guess. Then came the pregnancy announcement. We were having dinner at home, of course. Mark was there. When Grace dropped the news, I was over the moon, completely ecstatic. But Mark's reaction, it should have told me everything. He wasn't surprised, not in the least. Instead, he had this smug, knowing smile that sent a cold shiver down my spine. My stomach just flipped. After that, Mark was always there. He'd talk about how involved he was going to be in our child's life, touching Grace's stomach without asking, making comments about the baby's future. I tried to plan a romantic baby moon trip for Grace and me, but he somehow invited himself along. "The baby needs both of us," he said. And Grace actually agreed. I can still remember the night I found out. I'd been lying awake, my mind replaying months of little moments, puzzle pieces that suddenly seemed to fit together in the worst possible way. Grace was asleep next to me, her phone charging on the nightstand. In our 6 years together, I had never looked at her phone. I believed in trust, in privacy, but that night I had this overwhelming, sickening need to know. I picked up her phone, and there it was. Hundreds, maybe thousands of messages going back 6 months. While I was at work, they were planning secret meetings at hotels, talking about their future together, discussing the baby. Their baby. They had started sleeping together shortly after he came back into my life. The pregnancy wasn't an accident. They had planned to tell me after the baby was born, figuring I'd be too attached to the child to leave. My world just crumbled. Message by message I read until dawn, sitting in our reading chair, Grace's phone heavy in my hand. When she woke up, she knew instantly what I had found. She started crying. "We didn't mean for this to happen," she sobbed. "Mark and we just clicked." Or my personal favorite line from the Infidelity Handbook, "He knows me better than you ever could." And of course, "We were going to tell you, but we didn't want to stress you out after I got pregnant." Unbelievable. I called my parents that morning, just hoping against hope that they would finally stand by me. Their response? It left me speechless. "Mark made a mistake," Mom said, her voice annoyingly calm. "But he's going to be a father now. You have to forgive him. Be the bigger person. Think about the baby. Think about our grandchild." Their younger son, having an affair with their older son's wife, getting her pregnant, and their immediate reaction is to protect him again. Some things, I guess, never change. That day, I called a divorce lawyer and checked into a hotel. Grace alternated between begging for my forgiveness and blaming me for abandoning our family. Mark tried to corner me at work, saying we needed to have a man-to-man talk. I reported him for workplace harassment and had security escort him out. It was humiliating but necessary. The divorce itself was a nightmare. Grace and Mark claimed their affair was my fault, citing my emotional unavailability. They painted me as controlling and emotionally abusive. My parents even testified, saying I had always been difficult and had a lifelong jealousy of Mark. Mom actually blamed the mediator for the whole situation, saying he should have been more understanding of Mark's needs. After that, I stopped negotiating. We went to court. Grace still managed to get a decent settlement. Apparently, in this state, sleeping with your husband's brother doesn't automatically disqualify you from getting alimony. Small victories, I guess, like keeping the condo and most of my salary. So here I am now, 34 years old, divorced and completely cut off from my family. I changed my email, blocked their numbers, and told building security they are never allowed in. Some days I find myself wondering if there was anything I could have done differently, if I'd been a better husband, brother, son. But then I remember, I wasn't the one who lied and cheated. I wasn't the one who turned family against family. They say karma eventually gets everyone. I don't know if that's true, but I do know I'm sick and tired of being the family scapegoat. tired of being expected to be understanding and forgiving, while everyone else gets a pass for blowing up lives. My whole life I've been the one passed over, the second choice, the afterthought. No more. But just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, they were about to get even crazier. I honestly thought once I cut off contact after the divorce that my family would finally leave me alone. It's been about a month since everything went down, and I've been trying really hard to just focus on healing and moving forward. But apparently they had other plans. Yesterday morning, I was in the middle of an important meeting with my development team when our office receptionist messaged me. She said my mother, Carol, was in the lobby, demanding to see me. Apparently, she'd been there for over an hour, telling anyone who would listen that she just needed to talk to her son. My team had seen the whole Mark incident at work, so they knew exactly how uncomfortable I was. After I ignored her and tried to continue my meeting, my phone started blowing up with calls from blocked or unknown numbers. It seems my mother had somehow roped in a bunch of other family members to try and reach me. I finally answered one, thinking it might be work-related, but it was my Aunt Susan, Dad's sister, who I hadn't spoken to in years. She didn't even say, "Hello." She just launched right in. "Your brother and Grace are really struggling, Alex. Mark still hasn't found a job and the settlement money is running out." Turns out, Mark's affair with Grace had somehow gotten out into his professional network, and his reputation was pretty much trashed. A few potential employers had actually withdrawn job offers after doing background checks. I know this sounds awful, but I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of irony. For the first time, his actions had actual tangible consequences, but here's where it gets completely unbelievable. My parents haven't just been paying their rent and buying groceries. They've also been footing the bill for Grace's prenatal medical expenses. My father, David, has been draining his retirement funds, and now they are starting to panic because they are running out of money themselves. Their solution? They want me to step in and financially support the woman who cheated on me and the brother who destroyed my marriage. My mother didn't just show up at my office, she had a whole plan. She ambushed me at work because she knew I wouldn't return their calls. When I finally went down to the lobby to handle it, she threatened to stay until closing time. She launched into this prepared speech about forgiveness and family obligations. "Your father and I have always provided for both our sons," she said, completely forgetting that I had to pay for my own college education. "It's time for you to step up and help your brother through this difficult time." I honestly couldn't believe what I was hearing. A difficult time? My wife had an affair with him, got pregnant, and he tried to claim the child as his. That's not a difficult patch, those were deliberate choices. "Well," she said, foolishly trying to turn it back on me, "if you had just paid more attention to Grace's needs before..." I cut her off. "Get out," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Get out before I call security." As she was leaving, she actually yelled, right there in my office lobby, something about me abandoning my own brother and his unborn child. Even though my co-workers were supportive, it was still incredibly humiliating to have my private life aired out like that. Later that evening, Mark sent me an email. He'd created a new account to bypass my blocks. The email was this weird mix of half-hearted apologies and barely disguised requests for financial help. He wrote about how much Grace was struggling with the pregnancy, something I honestly didn't know, how they couldn't afford proper medical care, and how the stress was affecting my future nephew or niece. But the attachment, that's what really got to me. It was a sonogram picture. Even though the manipulation was obvious, using their unborn child to try and hit me emotionally felt incredibly low. The next day, my father showed up at my apartment building, pretending he was just there to talk. When the front desk called, I refused to let him up, so for 2 hours he stood in the lobby, telling anyone who would listen about how his successful son was letting his brother's family suffer. Since then, I've had to inform my building management about the situation and ask them to bar any of my family members from entering. It feels incredibly awkward discussing my private issues publicly like this, but I honestly don't see any other choice. The harassment has even spread to social media. Grace has been posting vague accusations on her page, implying she was abandoned during her pregnancy by her emotionally unavailable husband. And Mark has been reposting them, adding his own comments about how some people need to step up and take responsibility. The irony of him talking about responsibility while begging for handouts is just infuriating. It's enraging how they've twisted this entire story. They're portraying me as the bad guy because I won't financially support the people who betrayed me. They seem to genuinely believe that just because I'm doing well professionally, I have some kind of obligation to bail them out of the mess they created. I've started documenting everything now. The emails, the incidents at work, the social media posts. My lawyer says we might need it if they try anything legal, and she's particularly concerned they might try to use the court system to get more support. Worst of all, I've started getting messages from some extended family and even old family, friends urging me to put family first and be the bigger person. They don't seem to understand that Mark and Grace destroyed the last bit of family I had left. Even though I'm standing firm on not helping them, the constant harassment is exhausting. To cope with all of this, I've been seeing a therapist, and I'm seriously considering looking for a new job in a different state. I hate the idea of running away, but I'm at a loss for how else to find peace. My own family has stooped to a level I never imagined, but here we are. They aren't just asking for help, they are actively trying to bully and pressure me into giving money to the very people who ruined my life. I have a feeling this isn't over yet. Desperate people do desperate things, and they are getting desperate. Well, it happened. Out of the blue, I got a notice from my former wife's attorney. Mark and Grace were trying to sue me for more support. They cited increased medical needs and changed circumstances. My lawyer, who had been meticulously documenting every single instance of their harassment, was furious but completely ready. The court date was last week. Walking into that courtroom felt completely surreal. Grace was there, dressed to highlight her very obvious pregnancy. Mark sat beside her in my father's old suit, looking nervous, and right behind them, my parents sat, looking utterly smug and arrogant. Their lawyer was up first. He spun a story that almost made me chuckle. They claimed the initial settlement wasn't enough because they had undervalued the emotional toll of the divorce. They argued that my pattern of workplace harassment had prevented Mark from finding a job, and even implied that the stress I was causing with my vindictive behavior was putting Grace's pregnancy at risk, requiring expensive, specialized care due to high-risk issues. Then it was my lawyer's turn, and what she did was just breathtaking. She started by playing surveillance footage from my office building, my mother's theatrical displays in the lobby, Mark's aggressive attempts to confront me, Grace even trying to sneak in through a back door. Then she presented the social media evidence, a detailed timeline of their online smear campaign, but the real kicker was their financial records. Turns out, Mark hadn't been unable to find work because of my pestering. He had actually rejected several job offers, deeming them beneath him. And Grace? She had actually turned down a full-time teaching position just to maintain her status as a jobless pregnant woman for the court's sympathy. But the most damning evidence of all came from Grace's prenatal records. They showed a perfectly healthy pregnancy with entirely normal expenses. They had been completely fabricating the high-risk issues. They had been using their unborn child as a pawn. The judge was clearly not amused. He interrupted their attorney when he tried to argue that emotional distress warranted more support. "Counselor," the judge said, his voice cold and stern, "it appears your clients may have committed perjury. Do you really wish to proceed in this direction?" Their lawyer went back to the table looking utterly defeated. Mark was pale, Grace was crying, and their united front had completely crumbled. The judge's ruling was better than I ever could have hoped for. Not only did he reject their motion for more support, he actually lowered my existing alimony payments by 60%. This court does not look favorably upon parties who attempt to manipulate the legal system, he stated firmly. It appears Mr. Smith is the victim of a calculated effort to exploit him, both financially and emotionally. The fallout was swift. Grace suddenly decided she could work after all. Mark surprisingly ended up landing a job in retail. My parents, in their final message to me, accused me of destroying Mark's last chance and swore they would never forgive me for abandoning family. Their attorney resigned, citing irreconcilable differences regarding truthfulness. My company increased security and permanently barred them from the property. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard my parents had taken out a second mortgage to cover their legal bills and that Mark and Grace were constantly fighting about money. Finally, I feel like I can breathe. The lower expenses mean I can actually start rebuilding my savings, and I'm seriously thinking about taking a job offer I got in a different state, maybe out west. Sometimes, letting people face the consequences of their own actions is the best form of justice, but I still have a feeling this story isn't quite over. I wanted to start by saying thank you to this online community, to the few close friends who stuck by me, and honestly to my therapist. Your support and just knowing I wasn't alone through all of this has kept me going. This might be the last update on my side of things. A few weeks after the court victory, my Aunt Susan, my dad's sister, reached out unexpectedly. She's never been involved in family drama before, so I was curious enough to actually take her call. Big mistake. She started off trying to sound concerned. "Your father isn't getting any younger, Alex," she said, her voice thick with fake worry. "All this stress is really affecting his health." She went on and on about how my parents were losing their retirement savings, how they had to refinance their house to pay for Mark and Grace's expenses, and how family should stick together no matter what. When I didn't immediately respond with pity, she switched tactics. "Did you know your mother cries herself to sleep every night?" she asked, trying for the emotional appeal. "Even if they weren't perfect parents to you growing up, they're still your parents. And Mark is still your brother despite everything that's happened." Finally, I cut her off. "Despite everything that's happened?" I asked, my voice flat. "Are you talking about the months he spent sleeping with my wife, getting her pregnant, and then trying to claim the child as his own? Is that what you mean by everything that's happened?" Her response floored me. "Well, maybe you could have been more involved in your marriage," she actually said. She tried to somehow blame me for their affair, claiming my childhood jealousy of Mark had created a toxic environment that drove them together. It was so ridiculous I actually laughed. Really laughed. Another member of the family trying to twist things and trick me into taking responsibility for Mark and Grace's awful behavior. But this time, it didn't even sting, not one bit. "Susan," I asked, my voice calm now, "if you're so worried about their financial situation, why don't you help them? Your husband's law practice is doing well. You own 3 rental properties. Why am I the only one who's supposed to stand by them?" "That's different," she sputtered, claiming I had a special obligation as Mark's brother. When I asked her why she hadn't stepped in during the affair or the divorce or the harassment, she said she didn't want to take sides. "But you're taking sides now, aren't you?" I said. "You chose to come to me and demand that I pay for their consequences, instead of acknowledging the harm they caused." Then she pulled out what she clearly thought was her trump card. "Your father is thinking of retiring early because of the stress," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "They might have to sell the house. Is seeing your parents lose everything because you're too proud to help them what you really want?" "No, Susan," I replied. They are losing everything because of their decision to enable Mark's actions again. They, like Mark and Grace, are facing the consequences of their own choices. And guess what? I am not responsible for fixing that. Family is all we have in the end, she insisted, her voice turning threatening. When you're older and alone, you'll regret this. No, I said. Self-respect is all we have in the end. And I am finally choosing to keep mine. I hung up on her and then blocked her number. But that call had an unexpected effect. It gave me clarity. For the first time, I felt truly free from the obligation and the guilt that had been layered on me since I was a kid. Later that day, I accepted the job offer in a different state. The change of location feels right, and the company is giving me a significant promotion. I'm selling the condo. I'm starting over. Yesterday, my co-workers threw me a farewell party. From these people who supported me through the darkest months of my life, I learned what real support looks like. My closest colleague gave me a card, signed by everyone with a simple message. Your worth isn't determined by those who couldn't see it. I've learned that family isn't about blood. It's about mutual support, respect, and trust. The friends who stood by me, the co-workers who shielded me, and ultimately myself, they turned out to be my real family. To my parents, Mark, Grace, and now Susan, you made your choices, and you are responsible for the outcomes. I am no longer available to be your ATM or your scapegoat. As for me, I'm excited for my new life out west. I'm excited about the opportunities waiting for me at the company's renowned West Coast office. More importantly, I'm excited to build a life where I am valued for who I am, not constantly measured against someone else's golden child. Writing this last post from an empty condo, surrounded by stacked boxes, feels strangely appropriate. I start driving west tomorrow. I'll be leaving behind the old life with all its pain and familiar conflict. And yes, in case you were wondering, their baby was born last week. No, I haven't contacted anyone or seen any pictures. I've closed that chapter. Again, thank you to everyone who followed along and offered support. When I was doubting myself, your encouragement and advice kept me going. To anyone going through something similar, know that your worth is not defined by how your family treats you. Sometimes walking away is the most loving thing you can do for yourself. It's time to go. Here's to fresh starts. Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more deep and meaningful stories.